Oh, we're back. Hey, Mark, how you doing today?
I am doing.
That's the first how you're doing today. Remember, we got two times because we ask, and then we all typically, right, people pass you like, how you doing today? Oh, I'm good. But it's not the how are you really doing
Are you really doing?
answer,
Yeah.
which we are gonna get into. But we are back with our I don't are we on three? Are we is this our third
It
or
might. I think it might
fourth?
be four
Okay.
now.
I I can't keep up. We have so many shows. No,
They're coming. They're coming at a
they're coming.
faster pace. Because there's more real shit to talk about. So
Yeah, and it's all tough stuff, but we're here to help. We're here to help you who are listening and watching. Sort of maybe have a framework of how you could talk about it. We're here to fumble through talking about it ourselves and give ourselves some space and opportunity to do that. So, and then to give the folks that we have on the show a space and a platform to talk about it too. So, but we always do we've been doing our shirt check in, our t-shirt check in.
do you want to talk about our guest?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Oh, we do have a guest that's going to join us in a few minutes.
Yeah.
A Crystal who's going to join us, and we're gonna have a real conversation today.
Yeah, we are.
We're gonna get some stuff off of our minds, off of our hearts, and invite Crystal to do the same. And she's um, I really feel like she's gonna help connect some of the pieces um, and hopefully just allow some space for some really interesting dialogue.
Tough
I think.
shit. Some tough shit. So I've got an I've got a I love you um t-shirt on.
Did you hear that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. So
Was
the
that
spam people are calling me. It was a spam risk and
Sam?
it rang on my
I was
yeah.
gonna say it's lunchtime. Is it Uber Eats
And
out there?
no, I live too far away for a bunch of good
Uber.
stuff to come. You got
Okay.
I love you though. Let's focus on like
Yeah.
you're sending all the positive I love you vibes today.
I've got I love you on. I think we need that.
Yep.
Well, we always need that, but given the continued events and the most recent one, which we'll get into here, uh, it's I think the right shirt to have on.
Amen.
Um, so how about you?
Yep.
What
I
do you
got
got?
on one of my God is dope t-shirts. I have probably about 10 different ones, just different designs, but this felt appropriate for me. It's my favorite color, purple on it, but I needed the comfort of just being reminded that God is dope today. So I had to put this one on.
Yes, whether it be God or the universe or the higher power, definitely need that to at least try to keep us sane,
Yeah.
um, given everything that's going on. So, um, yesterday, just for the audience, Elaine texted me and said, could we record a show? Um, I think we both woke up feeling a certain type of way, following the um, events in Texas,
Hmm.
and it was interesting because um, on one level, I wanted to help her process and be there for her, and also the audience, and on another level, um, I could barely function in terms of like phone calls or really anything. So we agreed, let's move it to today where we process the events of Texas and Buffalo,
Yeah.
um, which is just a week ago, and then followed up with as you I'm having a hard time even talking about it because
Okay.
it's just hard to um it's hard to process that we're here. It's hard to process that it keeps happening. It's hard to process that it's become our normal and in some way, and yet it's so abnormal and so not normal.
Mhm.
I've got people that I know around the world, who live in other countries texting me or messaging me, basically saying, pardon the French, what the fuck?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
what is going on over there? Right. And I,
It's the same stuff that's been going on, unfortunately. That's the problem, is that it's more of the same. And I'm 100% with you. While it's like yesterday was tough, there was that, and there was just some other stuff going on for me, but it was a tough morning, I will say. The problem is that like this conversation could have happened last year, the year before, the year before, the year before that. It's like this. It's tough to process, and then here we are again. Um, and so,
I saw the number 222 or 228
yeah,
mass shootings in 144 days. So to your point, it could happen the year before, the week before, it could happen the day before,
the
right?
day before. Yep,
When so that's basically, there's two mass shootings a day,
yep,
right? And that's just mass shootings, and that's what we're focused on
yeah,
here and processing that, because we can certainly go into other things in terms of
yeah,
what's wrong. But I mean, just, you know, 27 school shootings year to date, and that doesn't get
yep,
discussed. 228 mass shootings, and that's just become normalized,
yep,
right? And it's just infuriating, and right, it's just, and you feel almost helpless and hopeless, right?
yep,
And you're just in it. Um, and yet I would hope for a lot of people that they recognize that it's not normal, but there are some people who somehow are okay with it,
yeah.
right? So it's like grappling with that is just is brutal. Is
You know
brutal.
what I feel like it is. I don't know if this is going to be a good analogy or a bad analogy. This is all I got. So, so I think anybody who's listened to us for any minute of time or knows me, like the whole fitness thing. So my analogies usually go to fitness or basketball. That's pretty much my range is small, but it's like when you have a movement pattern in your body that's quote unquote dysfunctional. There's a way that your muscles are supposed to move to give you optimal performance, right? Like your posture is supposed to be straight up, right? Like most people are this because we're on a computer, we're on a phone all day, or your neck is put forward. So when you do the bad things and
Mm,
you move in a way that is not optimal, you get used to that. And so those unoptimal things get comfortable, and that's the space and that's the way that you move and you like to move. And how when you correct it feels wrong. It's hard to correct the things. And so I feel like we know it's bad to
mm,
slump,
mm.
but we've gotten into such a pattern that it becomes useful. And so it is a repeated dysfunctional pattern.
And I could make the same. So I'm not into fitness as much as
Yep.
I should be, but my mental fitness, right?
Yep.
And it's your brain gets into patterns,
Yep.
right? Your brain gets habitualized to, certain thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
and there's modalities that help you change the way you think,
Yep.
whether it be a negative thought pattern to a positive thought pattern, or a distorted view on the world versus, something that maybe it resembles more of a reality, more gray thinking instead of black and white. Um, and making that change is difficult,
Yeah.
right? When your brain has been operating a certain way and it's uncomfortable, to your point, right? So, it's the brain is just it's a muscle too,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So, it very much related. And I think you're exactly right, is we as a society have gotten so used to this is the way things are,
Yep.
that switching that is hard.
Yeah.
Yet doable,
Doable.
right?
Yeah, absolutely
Doable,
doable. Yeah.
doable,
Called
doable.
the cumulative injury cycle in fitness. So you keep injury, you if you've got an injury and you injured your knee, more than likely the highest risk you have to injure yourself is on that same injury. But if you
Yeah.
keep on, keep on, keep on. Um, anyway, we've got an awesome guest with us,
Yes, we.
who's dialing in with us today. Crystal's here with us. I want to bring her into the conversation, and I feel like even if we can, and you verbalized a little bit of it, Mark. I, I I think I kind of verbalized a little bit, but also want to give Crystal some space to verbalize too. Where, how can you describe where you are today? Like
Can we take a step back and give
Yeah,
some context
please,
on
please
Crystal?
do that.
And
Yeah,
I'm
sorry, I had a little background and
yeah,
I jumped ahead.
and
Yeah,
I'm
go
happy
ahead.
to do that. I'm happy to
Please
do that.
do.
So, Crystal's a dear friend. Um, Crystal lives in Oxford, Michigan. For those of you who don't know anything about Oxford, Michigan, uh, uh, north of Detroit, right, Crystal?
Yes.
Yeah, north of Detroit. And last year, there was a school shooting at the high school in her town, and the 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 way people know about that particular school shooting, and the fact that you have to say that
Right.
is messed up. Um, it's the one where the parents bought the gun for the child, who ultimately did the school shooting. So Crystal has the perspective of the impact that these shootings have on the community, that have on the people in the community. Um, say nothing of the people who lose their children
Right.
can't even imagine,
Right.
right?
Right.
Crystal has that perspective. She also has the perspective of, however many months later, and as these shootings continue to happen, what that does for the community every single time it happens, right? It's a traumatic event when it happens, and then it continues to be um, PTSD,
Yeah.
and then even more so when these events happen. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
unfortunately, Crystal has this experience, and I say unfortunate is who wants to have this particular experience. I don't know anybody who would want to be able to say I have this experience. So that's a little background on Crystal. And yesterday was very difficult for her in terms of processing for her and helping the community process. So a little background now. Elaine, what was the question?
Oh, sorry. I'm so glad that you added that. It was more so, hey, take 30 seconds and give us where are you? Where are you? I don't want to ask how do you feel, because that's we can only imagine. I just want to know where you are. Like, are you in the beginning process? Are you in are you still trying to process? If you can put it into words, and sometimes we've talked about it on this show where you don't have the language, and that's okay too. But I'm just curious if you have words for it to describe where you are.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel everything you said. I'm in a place today. Um, the words are hard, but it's very much a feeling place. And I've done a lot of work over these months to try to stay in my heart. And so I can feel. But yesterday, there really weren't words for how I felt, to process it, the anger, just all the compassion, the grief,
Mm.
triggering, um, thinking of the community and friends. There's so many layers that come up, and it's still so fresh and raw. Today is better, I guess, in that I was able to actually check in, get a little more detail on the news because it was so much that I couldn't handle much more than just the headlines, so to speak. It is so large that it's hard to process just from a human compassion level. And that's pretty much where I am today. But I think talking about it, connecting with others is helping me process it. And I think that that is significant. And that is the most significant thing I've learned from this experience is the importance of human connection in the healing process. Even when we don't have words or answers, solutions, that is the most powerful starting point in these moments.
Mm. Well said. That's it. Mark.
So just makes me mad. That's all. Just the fact that we're okay with allowing events like this to happen, and yet it devastates communities every single time it does. Right. And it's not, it's just like this, like we're sitting in Atlanta, Elaine and I are anyway. And it's not that it doesn't affect us, but I mean, it doesn't affect us like Crystal or the friends that she has who are directly impacted. And, the families in Texas, the families in Buffalo, the families in the 228 other places, the families, I think there were, again, 288 school shootings in 10 years in the United States. And the thought that we're at a place where we're okay with our kids being taken this way, when I have a 13-year-old, and if anything happened to him, I'm done. Like, I say that and people say, oh, you would keep going. But like, would I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, honestly.
Right.
Like, just to think about something happening to my son
Oh, yeah.
and him being taken away from me. Like, and that we have a system that is seemingly saying it's okay if that happens by not doing anything. Right? Because we're not doing anything. The only thing that has changed from Sandy Hook 10 years ago to now is they now do active shooter drills in schools across the country to teach our kids what to do if there's an active shooter. That's it. Everything else is the same. That's fucked up. Yet Crystal and her friends and her community are reeling and will be reeling forever.
Yeah.
Right? It just doesn't go away. And we just move on. And the fact that we're not doing anything about it just infuriates me.
Yeah.
I agree. I could speak to that. I see where we try to move on as a community, but as you said, we can plan, we can have drills, we can do the things, but the grief and healing process takes so much time. And how do you, people are still grieving. The children are still grieving, even as they move on as students. And sometimes, as we know as human beings, sometimes it's in the background and it starts to drive our actions, much like the analogy to sports and mental health, our journey there. It starts to drive so much in the background if we don't process it properly. If we keep just soldiering on, it leaves such a deep scar for generations, I believe. As I see our community try to move forward, all of the planning and structure and things to do are in place, but I would ask how much of our heart is actually healing and where are the needs? Because I've heard stories of the struggle and it's very real and it's messy and it doesn't fit in the straight and narrow, the box that we're supposed to fit in our everyday life. And for me, I see a lot of questions raised and I get very angry because it hasn't been long and here we are again. And the situation here is so different than what we would plan for in those drills. I think there's a lot of questions behind what leads to these situations, because obviously the threat isn't always just inside the school.
Well, I think the drill becomes the recognition that no one's going to do anything about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the drill is the default in terms of, well, if nobody's going to do anything about it, this is the only thing we can think of, and that's pathetic, right?
It is, because it still happens.
It still happens, yeah.
Right. Like,
and that's just it's a farce anyway. When you think about a drill, you're what are you protecting them from? Like, there's not a.
It's a situation
I don't even know what
of
to, I
mitigation.
don't even call it. You're telling somebody, here's what you do if somebody's coming after you. You have there's not, and we're talking about
there's
in
nothing.
this instance babies. Like these are it's not even.
Listen to our conversation.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, this makes no sense that you have to
It makes no
prepare
sense.
someone
It makes
for
no
something
sense
like
to have this conversation.
Absolutely
The fact that we're
not.
having this conversation is asinine. I mean,
Yes, it is.
The shooter in Texas who was engaged by law enforcement, which is an argument that's being made in certain areas that schools should be armed. They were engaged by law enforcement. The shooter locked himself in a room, an adjoining room.
Right.
There is nothing to do. There's no desk to go under. There's no room to go in. There's there's nowhere to hide when you have an AR-15 pointed at you and you're a baby under a desk. That is not the answer to this.
It's not.
It isn't.
And yet, go ahead, Crystal.
Well, it just gives me the chills because it takes me into many things I could speak to. It's exactly that. We have to think of what message we tell the children when we're telling them that we're preparing them.
Right.
We're also telling them that this is likely, that this is something to expect when you go to school every day. We tell them it's a safe place.
Yep.
And yet behind that message, it's
we don't love you enough. We don't love you enough to avoid it. We're just gonna we're gonna kind of love you a little bit to try to like pretend that we care by teaching you these drills, but we're not going to do anything as adults to actually stop it. That's some bullshit right there.
And this situation speaks to that. Because once you're locked in a room with that,
you're done.
You're done.
What do you do? I mean, even if you're in the military, you have a way to fight back. There's nothing. I mean, like this. I can't agree with you more when you said the point, Crystal, that even preparing them for it is saying there's a likelihood, and at this point, a very high likelihood, unfortunately, that this is going to happen. I remember having earthquake drills. I grew up in California. This is a high likelihood this is going to happen. So you got to know what happens when an earthquake happens.
I mean, ask
the
yourself,
message behind that. And then this happens when
The trauma behind
the
that.
trauma behind
Well,
just
Like
that part.
like my son comes home yesterday and they say they talked about the shooting in Texas. And I said, in what format? And they said they had an assembly to talk about it. And the response was, you know, this is what's happening. This is why we prepare. This is why we do the drills, right?
Mm,
The fact that my son brought it up, I didn't know how to talk to him about it, right?
Yeah.
I'm not equipped, right?
Yeah.
So I got to go to therapy and I'll figure it out, right? Because this is now embedded in his head,
mhm.
right? So you not only have the communities that are being affected and people losing their children and trauma like Crystal and her community is going through, playing out all across the country. You now have our youth
That's
that
right.
has the trauma that they can't go to school because they're going to get shot.
Well, you can't go to school, you can't go to the grocery store, you can't live at your house, you can't walk down the street, you can't be Black, you can't be Asian, you can't be like, what can you be? Like,
exactly.
can you, what can you do? I mean, because this is, we are talking about,
And we've accepted it.
and we've accepted it. Like,
We've
it's
accepted it.
it's okay.
And finger pointing and blaming it on mental health, which is okay. You don't walk into a grocery store and shoot somebody, or walk into a school and shoot somebody without there being an underlying mental health condition, right? Like, yes, that person was in pain to get to the point to do something like that, right? Like, that's fucked up that they got to that point, that an 18-year-old is in so much pain that there's a mental health issue. But like I said on, Twitter yesterday, I have mental health issues. I am not shooting people with a gun I do not have, right? I am the first one to say I should not own a gun. I'm wearing an I love you shirt. I wear a lot of be kind. I have mental health issues. I am fine not owning a gun. I don't think I would do anything with that gun if I did, but I should not own a gun,
Mhm.
right? Like, I have moments where I am very sad and I should not own a gun, period. And the fact that you're pointing fingers at whether it's mental health or gun ownership, and we've had all of our little babies, or all these babies that have died, right? And all of the trauma that we're creating in our youth, not only in the communities that are being directly affected,
Yep.
but the fact that my son at 13 has to worry about going to school because he could be shot, or going into the grocery stores because he's going to be shot. He won't go. There's a town here in Atlanta, and we have listeners all over. There's a town called Buckhead, right? He
Mhm.
won't go to Buckhead. He will not go because he's afraid of being shot in a restaurant,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
That's
So, like, we have enough trauma.
Look, hey, we're talking about obviously mass shootings, and there's enough trauma just with being yourself. I
There's
mean,
enough
there's
trauma
enough
with
trauma with
being
me being
human.
a Black female. There's enough
Yes,
trauma with,
right.
with you being like, there is enough trauma already with just being yourself,
Yes.
and what comes with that. And not to mention, if you grew up in a not not wealthy, environment, if you didn't have a home that was stable, if you didn't have a home at all, I mean, like, if there's compound all of that on top of, oh yeah, now you gotta practice how to dodge bullets without
Well,
like,
and,
what is that?
and Crystal didn't talk about this, and hopefully, Crystal,
Yeah.
I mean, is it okay? Well, I'm gonna do it. I hope it's okay. Crystal homeschools,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And the fact that parents have to get to a point
Mhm.
to say, you know what, I don't feel safe for my kid to go to school, so I'm going to homeschool them, right? And that's not the only reason Crystal's homeschooling, right?
No.
But I've heard this story from around the country. I don't feel safe sending my kid to school. I'm in a homeschool. Like, really? So, like, to even have to factor that into the calculus of life, right? Like, again, life is hard. There's enough trauma in all these communities of being human,
Mhm.
right? And more trauma for certain races and certain genders.
Yep.
And now to layer this trauma on top of the trauma that we already have, like, why aren't we doing everything and anything to make it stop? Right? We know some of the reasons, right? Um, but again, it's just, what, and I don't want this show to be, you know, rage against the machine and um there not be any, okay, well, what's your solution?
Mhm.
Right? Well, I mean, I think the awareness that, are we all not affected by the fact that we're creating massive trauma for generations to come?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't, whether you're white, whether you're black, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, whether you, whatever, our kids are being affected
Mhm.
directly, like in Crystal's community and in Texas and in the other 26 or 25 locations that have, and the 280
Yep.
some odd locations, and Buffalo and right, that we're creating generational trauma
Yep.
that just doesn't go away, and we're okay with that. We're okay with that. And I would say, for anyone who's listening, if you're going to look in the mirror and be okay with that, I don't know what to say to you,
Yeah.
honestly.
And go ahead, Crystal. I feel like you were gonna jump in.
Yeah, so many things come to mind. Yes, I think we need to ask those tough questions. My path is unique because there's been a few different situations that led to homeschooling. We were at a school that decided to have an armed guard when my oldest son was young, and then that gun got left accidentally in the bathroom during a break. And of course, that was a very heated conversation because not everybody agreed with the guard being at the door in the first place. So they were trying to address safety, but this revealed some of the downfalls, right?
Mhm.
So I've seen that iteration. And then I always thought that my children were going to have this classic path through one school system. You know, you get these ideas as a parent, and they're not always available today because of these situations. Most of my choices were made around
Mm.
safety and my children being able to grow up with a sense of a foundation of community and safety. And leading up to homeschooling this year, we were thinking of, actually, they were enrolled to be in the high school. So my oldest would be at the high school. And synchronicity led to that changing. I It is so hard to apply all of these experiences to the conversation and say like what the solution would be. I was witnessed all approaches to this, and there is no answer other than I know that I have survivor guilt, as odd as that might sound, that we chose to homeschool this year. And I couldn't be happier that we did. But it gets complex. It gets very complex because these are some of those kids we've known since kindergarten. You know, we know the stories. So then here we are now with clear backpacks and all of the things we think of, and at least we're doing something. But behind that, there's still that question of why are children still executing children? Why are we at a point in our country that this is something that happens so commonly that the statistics are here? And that it's also not just in the school system.
Mhm.
Obviously, this applies more broadly, that the root of this is much deeper.
Well, I mean, we talked about this earlier, Crystal. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
it's a cry for help, right? I mean,
Yes,
it's a cry for help.
it really is. And so we can do all the things. And I think that it's important that we do the things. But when it happened, I even talked to friends that are at schools that have significant security in place. And because many were saying, okay, I don't feel, teachers that we know um, weren't feeling safe, and they feel the burden of responsibility on top of all the things they must do, all the curriculum and the standards and all the things. Now there's mental health, and they're expected to protect our children, our babies. This is, I mean, who signs up for that?
Mm,
It's
Yeah.
so much, and they wanted more security. And the conversation um, that came up was, does it actually make a difference? And many of the people that are in school systems where there is security said, actually, it doesn't help. It just means they get wiser to it, because there's still a problem. There's still a violence problem, a mental health problem, so many other things behind the scenes motivating these decisions, that you can stop them from bringing a gun into the school, but it could still happen in the parking lot.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we know these things from other patterns in society. So I think we have to dig a little deeper and understand that it's not going to protect the children like we
yeah.
want. And
Well,
then it's not just guns. They'll find some other way. That was another part of the conversation. So I think we do need to look at the full picture and the humanness behind
well, I think it gets into these situations where people think it's like a again, I can't even believe we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
First off,
Well,
right? But like it gets into an and solution, and it's not just mental health. It's not
no,
just
it's
the
not
fact
just.
that we have a proliferation of guns. Because one of the arguments is, oh, they'll find another weapon. You're right, they will find another weapon, and that doesn't necessarily make it, you know, that the gun supporters will say, well, they're going to find some other way to do the damage, right? Like, okay, fine. Then if they're going to find some other way to do the damage, let's do something to solve the problem, to solve that problem and get to the root of the mental health
I
issue.
agree.
But we don't do anything. We don't do anything. We point the finger and we blame it on everything.
Yeah.
And I think
We
that,
blame it on everything. We don't do anything.
Right.
and why don't we look at it as mitigation? I mean, really, that's what we're applying, almost a more of like a business mindset to,
Free market capitalism to the safety of our community, right? Well, we'll just institute these drills
exactly.
of hiding on under a desk, or we'll arm
We're
the
gonna
grocery.
mitigate the likelihood of, how many deaths or significance of the situation.
If I'm
No,
not
it does
mistaken,
not solve it.
if I'm not mistaken, Buffalo had a former FBI agent at the at the entrance,
No,
right?
I believe so. I believe so.
Right.
Yeah.
And Texas, that school had its own police force. If I'm
Mhm.
not
Oh, we had a significant response too. We had Homeland Security. I can't even begin. Oh, sorry, it gets me really angry. Because we try not to give attention to these situations,
Mm,
the magnitude is also not seen.
mhm,
Yeah.
Anything I've seen in the news doesn't come
mm,
close to what it was like to be here and see the response. Nothing showed what it was like to go through this. And I live right by it. I had to get to my children.
Mhm.
I had to go through SWAT teams, and Homeland Security was here, and every first responder I mean, it was a war zone.
yeah.
People do not realize, because we're not, I understand that we don't want to give glory to the situation,
Mm,
but we also minimize
mm,
the war zone, the reality of what it was like to go through this. If I hear a helicopter overhead, if I hear a plane, if I hear a siren, and I wasn't even in the school,
mm,
it triggers just chills through my body. I can't
mm.
even begin to speak to what it was like to witness it. So no matter how much we have an armed response. It's still a person doing, acting out in a way that's going to do damage in any of these situations. So I think we need to mitigate that across many methods, because obviously the, gun control can be a factor, because all of these situations seem to have a trend of, okay, I bought a gun and 1 week later I'm using it, to speak to Mark's points earlier about mitigating the risk of the type of weapons available, and how accessible they are, and so on. I think that that's still part of it, but I think that, like you said, it's a multi-layered, complex issue, because you could put a gun in front of anybody and they're all going to have a different response to
Right.
how they might use it. You could put a whole bunch of weapons on a table in front of a person, and someone's gonna not touch it, and somebody else is going to, think, oh, maybe in terms of sport or, target practice or whatever, and then somebody else is gonna be the one that looks at it as a way to express whatever is internalized and go on a rampage.
Well, I think you
Yeah.
touched on something that's very interesting too, this avoidance. I think that's I don't know if it's a United States thing or if it's just a human thing. I know I'm doing a lot of work on that right now. Just things that are painful, you avoid subconsciously or consciously, right? Like if it's hot, you don't touch it. And I think um, Crystal, I think you raise a really good point in terms of like, when will our country stop running from it and actually show the truth and show the real impact that it's having in these communities, and and talk about the real trauma impact that it's having, not only on the families that are directly affected, but kids all across our country who are now traumatized to go to school because they're scared of dying, right?
Right,
And
and can they even say that? I mean, I think there's also that
can, can
part
you
where
yeah,
it's so normalized.
you start to build the walls of avoiding that, the fear of that, right? So that's trauma right there, right? Like if I'm afraid to go to school and I'm going to build up some coping mechanism, right? That trauma is going to live inside you for the rest of your life. The end, right? Like we all have our own trauma, and our culture, again, I don't know if it's a US thing or a global thing or a human thing. And I'm actually reading a chapter in a book right now. Like the longer you avoid something, the more painful it becomes. And then
Yes,
it manifests itself as something, which could be either self-harm or harm of other people, or some event, right? Like I've gone through my own, like dealing with my own trauma, and it led to me doing a lot of soul searching on a lot of stuff, right? It hasn't been violence that I turn to. It's like uh call it rock bottom, right? Call it like a wake up call, call it a holy shit, who am I? Call it a what that, because of all of the different things that I did to not deal with the underlying pain of my own trauma, and it manifests itself somehow. So we're basically giving our entire society another layer of trauma, including our kids, our dear babies, our dear little kids, this underlying trauma, and then we just expect them to be normal as not only kids, but as adult kids who become adults, when they've lived with the fear of going to school every day and have had to build up some coping mechanism to that, right? And
Well,
then
if they even had the tools to do it, because
even if they have the tools to do it,
there are
and
there
then
are
we and then
plenty of
they
us who don't have the tools to come up with they don't have the language to come up with a coping
no.
mechanism. They don't even know what it is. Like, well,
And then they go
coping mechanism. This
and,
is
and
this
then
is just life.
those kids go
exactly.
commit crimes or whatever it is, because the trauma, to your point, they
Yeah.
can't process that, they don't have the tools to process that, and it manifests itself in other ways. and then we look at them like they're the problem. No, we're the problem.
Yeah.
The
I
adults
agree.
are the
Yeah.
problem. The
Well,
adults are the
see,
problem.
this is that very thing is partially too, and sort of what you said a little earlier, Mark, is where I struggle a little bit, even with my own faith, because I truly believe, and this is me, and I'm not preaching, and I'm not a Bible scholar. I'm a regular person who goes to church, reads my Bible. I don't bother anybody. But here's the thing: there are some people who I believe they're just evil. I'm sorry. That we can say, this is me talk. This is what I believe. There's people who struggle with mental illness and mental health, and that may come out in a different way. Mark, you've shared you struggle with your mental health, but you're not going around shooting people. I think that is such a valid point, because there are some people,
But I could be.
but you could be.
But I
But
could
there are
be.
some people who are just, I'm sorry, no matter there, there's not they were, their intent was to do what they were going to do, and I'm not saying there's nobody who there, you throw people away, they can't come back from anything, but I truly believe, and this is where, again, where there are influence, particularly in a situation with Buffalo, where there were things that young man was watching, listening to, that led to the fact that he targeted older Black people, elderly Black people in a grocery store. It wasn't that he just went to the local grocery store. No, he drove specifically to that one. This young man who drove to an elementary school, he was in high school. Like, there was no business for him to be at the elementary school to shoot babies. And so I personally, is where my faith lies, that there are things that are, where you want to call them demons, where you want to call whatever, but there are situations where there is a element of evilness that is within people, and it comes out in the ways that we have seen and we continue to see. And yes, we need to focus on gun safety, gun control, whatever you want to call it, whatever words you want to use. Yes, we need to focus on mental health, and we need to, there should not ever be a 2-month waiting period for someone just to seize because they need assistance with mental health. And that's if you can afford it, or you have insurance to be able to get it, because there's also that. But there's also just some things where, you know what, we have to figure out what else can we do, because these issues are going to keep coming.
I would love to chime in. I think you're raising really, really good points. There are elements at play here that are beyond solving problems.
Yeah.
A lot of times we put a lot of our energy because we don't know how to deal with it, but we have the compassion, our will is behind wanting to do something, but we don't know what. And then we go into problem solving mode, which is a lot in our head. This problem, I'm a very spiritual person. I do feel that there are times in situations I've witnessed that go beyond logic in possible solutions. And so, can we balance a solution with our heart also, and ask about that human element? I look at the situation here, and it has many of those elements. What the shooter was consuming in social media and movies and all of the things that can influence. And sure, we could call that the mental layer, but there's also a very soul-driven layer behind all of us. And like Mark has said, and it's not all mental health leads to these decisions. My heart would speak to most of the people like us and anybody listening and say how often each of us probably has already gone through that. We're humans. We have the struggle of getting up every day or doing the things we need to do or going through a phase in life, but the majority are not going out there and doing these things. We choose a different choice. So the question is, what makes them choose to act? And I look at the situation here and experience from work, um, dealing with the problem, intervening, and the cost, because I've witnessed situations where it's obvious that a child needs help, but it doesn't fit into the framework of
Mm,
acknowledging or having the time or resources because we're so data driven day to day to get those kids through a system. And
mm,
like you said, the race element or any element behind the decisions, it goes, I can speak very much to the educational perspective, but I really feel these are parallel. The root of the decision, what drives them to choose to take action and do so in the most horrific way they can. I mean, we have to acknowledge, I think, that like this situation, it was for impact.
mm.
It was
Yep.
not just,
Yep.
I hate to go into any other scenario. I think you know what I'm saying.
I do.
These acts are meant to be seen, and then we're pushing them to the side saying, well, we don't want to give attention to it. But I
Mhm.
don't think it's leading to any solutions because they keep getting louder, they
Mm.
keep getting bloodier. So
Mhm.
what can we do? Can we move into our heart and balance that with a logical solution?
And
Hopefully.
now we're getting to the most vulnerable. I mean, did you see that? Like, that is not lost on me. You have, I mean, you used to think that older people and kids were off limits. Like even when
Right.
you're just
Yes.
joking on people, right? Like you don't,
Right.
hey, you don't joke about somebody's mom, you don't joke about somebody's kids. Like those usually off limits. We're talking about in a span of 2 weeks
Mhm.
that those were the attacks. That's where the attacks happen. And,
Mm.
and then
Yes.
you go back to the folks who were in church and they were, I'm like this is where we are. Like so
You're going for the most vulnerable,
the
and we
most
cannot
vulnerable.
dismiss that, right? Like, isn't that not obvious?
Yes.
Well, and like again, it's again, it's layers deep, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And you start getting into the mental health. Like there's so much anger targeted at certain age groups, community types, colors, right? To do these heinous acts. And anger, if you go through the emotion wheel,
Yeah.
anger, I think we could all agree, I think that if you're going to kill somebody or hurt somebody, that there's anger that drove it, right? Anger comes from sadness, right? On the emotion wheel, right? Anger is a manifestation of sadness, of of built up sadness that manifests externally as anger, right? Um, the sadness that is built up to get to the point, sadness and hate to build, and hate is a weird one
Hate.
too, right? Hate is
Hate that.
brainwashing. Hate it, like when you're born, the hate is not there day one, right? Like, or I don't think, and I don't know if we know that for sure, but like as a baby that is born, right? I don't, again, we're starting to get into territories that we can't prove or disprove. I don't think you're born with hate in your heart. Like I don't think you are.
Yeah.
Um, maybe some of that is passed along. I don't know the answer to that. I like to, I don't know. My thought is you're not born with hate in your heart, and that hate gets developed
Mhm.
um, based on the environment that you're in, and that there's systemic failures, lots of them,
Yep.
and brainwashing, lots of it, that ultimately leads to the hate.
Yeah.
That's my belief.
Yeah.
Um, if I'm wrong, then what I'm about to say is also wrong. But like, um, we're not doing anything to remove the hate. We know this, and this gets into multi level, multi hundreds of years of
Yeah.
systemic issues that are set up to build hate in one's heart for different communities. And but again, if it's hate driven and it's anger driven and we're not focused on that, none of this is ever going to change,
Mhm.
right? And then couple that with a free
And it's
for
gonna
all.
get worse. Not is it not gonna change. It's gonna,
We
thought that was bad.
Exactly.
we have not even begun to process the fact that this trauma, that which is what this is,
Mhm.
and as it compounds in our kids, in my son, um of what we're living through, we have not even begun to process the impact that this is going to have externally. um because again, it's this trauma after trauma after trauma that drives people, and I don't like to use the term, crazy enough to go out and shoot 10 people in a grocery store and
Yeah.
shoot 19 children and 2 teachers dead,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, I think we could all agree on that
Yeah.
you have something went off for you to do that.
Mhm.
And it's trauma, and it's compounded trauma, and it's sadness, and it's compounded sadness, and it's hate, and it's compounded hate, and it's over and over and over again where people snap and they either do harm on themselves or they go do harm on other people because they don't know any other way out.
I think those are really good points
Mhm.
because you can couple that with the rising suicide rates.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's outward facing or inward facing
Absolutely.
of
It's a cry for help. I can't take the pain anymore. I'm either going to shoot somebody and get some attention, and that somehow in your mind is the only answer, or you kill yourself.
And
Right.
Right.
those numbers are getting younger too. It's like now it's younger people who are taking their own lives, and it's
Correct.
Yes.
people who you would not imagine, because on the outside their lives look great, but on the inside they're hurting and you don't see it. And we don't feel like, wait a minute, like you're good, like you should be good. And it's just it's attacking people all
And
over the
we
place.
avoid it because it's uncomfortable and it's hard and it's painful, and we
It's
do
not
it.
easy to talk about. This is
Nope.
the point of why we're here. None of this is easy for us to talk about. I mean, I don't want it to get lost on the people who are listening. We're none of us are experts in any of this. Like we're
No.
just we are like you, who are trying to figure out where our voices are in on the many spaces that we're going to explore. But also, we all have an opinion. We all are hurting. We all have issues that we come to this podcast, to this YouTube video, whatever, with. We all have different ways that we're processing it, but we don't have all of the answers. But collectively there is an answer. Collectively there are answers to all of the things. Unfortunately, there are people who for whatever reason do not have the courage or the guts to do the things.
I just hope that we can all get to a point where if you really internalize what that pain would feel like to have an empty chair
Yep.
at your dinner table, and no more snuggles with your kids, or what would happen if it was your grandparent, and maybe you don't have a good relationship with your grandparents, and maybe that's where the anger lies. But I hope enough of us can connect the dots to not having your child at the dinner table, or not having grandma or grandpa at the dinner table, or like, and internalize that enough to where you say enough is enough.
Right.
Right. That's my hope.
Yeah.
Right. Like, personalize it enough to take yourself out of your own self
Mm-hmm.
and put yourself at the table, and no more kisses from your kids and no more hugs from grandma and grandpa, and say, you know what, this is fucked up.
Yeah.
something's got to change. That's
Okay,
what I hope.
here's the other thing, and if that doesn't move you, figure out whether whatever keeps happening affects your money, because you know what, some people are just driven by the fact that it's going to hit their wallets, and unfortunately after shootings like this, guns that are used in there, the sales go up. And you know what, it's it's unfortunate that probably AR sales are going to skyrocket at this point.
Yep.
It's sad, but and so if what Mark said doesn't move you, you don't feel connected to your kids, your parents, your loved ones, then what if it hits you in your pocket? Because all of this has a financial impact for some people in a bad way, some people in a good way, and it is not lost on a lot of us that some people are going to profit off of this and have no problem with that and be able to sleep at night. Unfortunately, I don't know how great they're sleeping, but they're sleeping and they're waking up the next morning and cashing a check.
That's a really good point. I think
Yeah.
as an American, I also feel, to speak to some of both of your earlier points, then I'm ready to put down the facade of acting like everything's okay, both personally and collectively, and move into my heart. Stop being, I said this to Mark at one point. I feel like we're that perfect house on the block with the white picket fence
Mm.
in the neighborhood that acts like the family has no problems and is okay. But really, obviously, things are going down and there's some mental health problems and other problems. And it's time for us all to acknowledge it,
Yeah.
that this is happening in our country and it's not a pattern elsewhere, and ask why.
Mm-hmm.
Put the pride to the side and go into our hearts. Add some logic in.
I thought it was a great analogy earlier when you said that. Like, America really thinks it's this like perfect little picket fence place, and like it's time that we admit that's such bullshit. Like that, like we're better than this,
Right.
which we used to hear all the time. No, we're not. No, we're not. Like it's a perfect example because we all have this vision of these. We see everybody going and living these like perfect lives,
Yeah.
or we think they are, and then they end up divorced, or somebody ends up, doing something that you're like, what?
Right.
I can't believe that actually happened. Well, like none of it shocks me anymore, right?
Yeah.
Because it's all a facade. It's all complete and utter bullshit.
Yeah.
Right. And like, let's not like maybe let's stop propagating the bullshit.
That's
Right? Maybe we just actually look at ourselves in the mirror and say, you know what? This shit's fucked up.
Yeah.
Right. And like acknowledge that we're fooling ourselves. We're trying to fool other people, and like just be real for a change and actually look in the mirror and say, this shit's ugly.
Mhm.
Right. And admit that instead of pretending like it's perfect and it's fine. It's not fucking fine.
Yeah.
It's not fine.
Yeah.
And we could probably go on for a long time, but
Well, we I don't know. The clock says, I know we started the talking before we actually started recording, so I don't know, but it seems like we've been on for a better part of an hour. But if you've been hanging with us, first of all, we appreciate you for listening in. As we post this, we want you all to give us feedback. Like, use this as a way to type what you're feeling, to ask questions of us. As we said, we're not experts, we don't have all the answers, but if there's something that we can answer, if you have suggestions about what we should talk about next, we want you to do that. We are committed to bringing to this show topics that are tough to talk about in general. They may be tough for us to talk about personally, but we feel that that's the vulnerable space and courageous space that we want to play in, because to what Mark just said and to what Crystal has been saying, it takes courage to be vulnerable and to show that you don't have it all together, that we collectively as a society do not have it all together, and we got problems the only way you get better at them is if you acknowledge that they're there. And so hiding in plain sight is what results in where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well said.
Well, thank you, Crystal,
Yes, thank you.
for being here under, again, my thoughts and prayers. And I hate that that's where we have to, again, I'm tired of the thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers go out to the families, and those impacted in Texas, and continued to get impact in Buffalo, and
Yep.
on and on and on. And Crystal, thank you for being here.
Yes.
I know it's not easy to have to relive these moments personally, and also for your community, given everything that your community's been through and continues to go through and will continue to go through for generations to come. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me and just allowing me to use my voice. It is good for my heart. And I really appreciate what you both are sharing and giving voice to this. It is powerful. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And
Absolutely.
send love to your community.
Yes.
And Elaine, any parting words before we wrap up?
I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I feel like I said a lot of words, and
Yeah.
and hopefully some of it landed, some of it resonated. At that bare minimum, what I hope for, at least for those people who are listening with us today and who are willing to share with others, is that we've started a conversation about something, but we can't keep talking. There's something that has to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter where you fit in that, every space to attack these issues that we have in our community is not for everyone, but everyone has a space. And figure out where that is for you. And that's just where I want to leave it today. But I'll let my t-shirt say the rest, because that's all I got. That's all I got.
Amen. Sending love to everybody.
Absolutely. See you on the next one.
Bye-bye.